Chapter 4. Papa always said that the closest he ever came to being sent to the penitentiary was after I innocently exercised what I came to know as the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. Surprisingly, this near disaster also involved another amendment to the Constitution, namely the 18th, which forbade the manufacture and sale of alcoholic beverages from 1920 to 1933. Prohibition, the newspapers called it. The banning of booze, Papa called it. Papa placed the blame for this amendment on old fuddy-duddy politicians and, of course, women. Being an investigative attorney in Seattle, an ideal harbor for the importation of illegal contraband, he was well informed on the subject of bootleggers and rum runners. As he often said, prohibition promotes disrespect for the law, generates a wave of organized crime, and profits available from illegal alcohol corrupt every level of government. Roy Olmsted, a personable Seattle policeman, was a good example. He had begun small-time transportation of illegal liquor into Seattle from Canada. As his fortunes increased, he bought a fleet of fast boats and went big time. Surprisingly, some Seattle folks found redeeming qualities about Olmsted. Most amazing was that Olmsted insisted on following regular business practices. He would not allow his men to carry firearms, and even went to the extent of unloading his liquor at a downtown dock. In broad daylight, people declared. Papa often drove us by the big bootlegger's luxurious home in the Mount Baker area, explaining that Olmsted had become a folk hero because the citizens figured he was just giving back to the people what was rightfully theirs. Mama found this confusing. How can a policeman get away with breaking the law? Why doesn't the chief of police or the mayor do something about it? Maybe they're in on it too? That didn't fit Mama's fairy tale world. To her, there was right and there was wrong, and you were either on one side or the other, period. Our family involvement in conditional matters began one evening while we girls were eavesdropping on Papa and Mac from our perch at the top of the stairs. Papa said, "I've got an investigation coming up in Vancouver, Canada. I'm going to take Tenny and the girls. It'll give Tenny a chance to shop for English china. She loves that, you know. And it'll give me a chance to buy some good scotch. We'll have Tom and Jerry for Christmas." Mac was hesitant. "You'd better be careful. They're getting tough on inspection at the border." "I know that," Papa said, "but I've got it all figured out." "That's good. Maybe you can work up a regular run." "Maybe. Then you won't have to bother bringing me the supplies." "Well, if you get caught and have to spend the rest of your life in the pen, don't put the finger on me." Max stood up, ready to leave. "And don't say I didn't warn you." As if all Mac's warnings weren't enough, just the word trip gave me the twitches. I hated trips. Nothing in my life could compare with the trip I had when I was 4.5. Papa had received a call that his 72-year-old mother had died. He had made hurried arrangements to go back to Wisconsin for the funeral, and decided to take me, reasoning that with me gone and Flor already in school, Mama would have some relief from childcare. My troubles started at the train station on the evening of departure. Mama had come aboard to get me settled, had kissed me a tearful farewell, and departed. Suddenly Papa started after her, calling for me to sit still. I sat rigid as a frightened owl, my eyes surveying the elaborate Pullman car. I glanced out the window. To my amazement, there on the platform stood Papa kissing Mama, leisurely. Then came the end of my quiet. I began screaming and pounding on the window. I heard a loud voice. "All aboard!" I felt the train lurch. Mama and Papa looked up, smiling and waving, strolling along by my window. I had visions of being trapped on that huge black belching monster. Forever. Several anxious passengers and the conductor rushed to my side, but I was too terrified to explain my predicament. I could only go on screaming. Finally, Papa dashed up, embarrassed. Obviously, he'd have preferred disclaiming me, but I grabbed his trouser leg and wouldn't let go until we'd passed over the Continental Divide. During the whole trip, I was constantly having my bleary face wiped with Papa's big handkerchief. I missed home and Mama and my sisters. What was worse, I wasn't sure that ever again would I be able to trust either Mama or Papa. At one jarring stop, Papa picked me up out of the berth, carried me down the steps along the platform to a waiting vehicle, and tucked me into fur blankets in the back seat. The driver, conversing with Papa in whispers, steered out into the cold black night. I had finally stopped the shivers and was on the verge of sleep when, once again, I was picked up, carried into a big old house, and put into a cold bed. I awoke to unfamiliar surrounding and unsmiling faces. The following days were a maze of strange talk and the taste of strange food. I heard weeping. I was puzzled by Papa's distraction, and by a faded photograph that everyone examined while they stared first at Papa and then at me saying, "Oh yes, of course. She looks exactly like him." Long after I was safely home again, the memories had continued to haunt me. I thought that Wisconsin was a terrible disease that got inside people and made them cold and miserable and would eat away at them until they were as dead as Papa's mother. From that time on, the announcement of a trip sent me into a panic. Unfortunately, Mama had heard the conversation about the trip to Vancouver, BC, and of course it made her nervous. When Mama was nervous, she talked incessantly about what was making her nervous. As soon as she had settled in the passenger seat and placed her cosmetic bag on Papa's briefcase, a long, complicated exchange of ideas began. "But Roy, it would be illegal for you to bring liquor across the border." "I know it's illegal," Papa said, "but you're a lawyer. You're not supposed to break the law." Papa began a history lesson. He was a crackerjack at giving history lessons. "Prohibition is an unpopular law. It takes away individual freedoms. That's what the Boston Tea Party was all about." Mama was unconvinced. "I thought the Tea Party was about taxation without representation. If it had been whiskey instead of tea, those Boston men would never have dumped it into the harbor." Papa didn't answer. We were crossing the border. "It's easier getting into Canada than getting out," Papa remarked. "I hope that isn't a self-fulfilling prophecy," Mama said. In Vancouver, BC, we stayed at a large campground. Papa tended to his business and took Mama shopping for china. We little Bighams spent our time on the playground equipment. On the morning we were to start home, Mama was still nervous. She was washing up the camping plates and cups, Florence was drying them, and Dorothy and I were putting them into the big black case that stood on the running board of the car. "I will not be a party to taking liquor across the border." Papa was packing the bedding. "There's no risk involved. The inspectors are not after the little guy who's bringing back only a quart or two for his own use. They're after the big-time operators." "That's not what the newspapers say." Mama threw out the dishwater and ran the rag over the bottom of the pan. "What will they do if they catch us?" "Oh, probably throw you in the pen for 20 years. Papa was kidding, I hoped. I had been taking in every word and getting more apprehensive by the minute. "And you?" "They'll probably let me off because of my good looks." Mama didn't laugh. "And what about the children?" "They'll probably put the children up for adoption." Papa liked to carry ideas to the extreme. Mama turned to gather up the last-minute camping gear, saying emphatically, "Don't tell me where you're hiding it. I don't want to know." Papa headed toward the car. "All right, my dear, I'll spare you that carnal knowledge." Always before a journey, Papa checked the camping gear, kicked tires, and filled the radiator and canvas water bags that hung from the radiator cap, a last-minute ritual, like Mama taking all of us to the restroom. That day, all was ready except for Papa going to the restroom himself. He started out and then called back to Mama. "Oh, I forgot the radiator. Will you fill it?" "Of course." It was a beautiful day for driving, and Papa was singing one of his silly songs. But it was obvious that Mama was getting more nervous by the mile. As we approached the border, I could see that in spite of all his bravado, Papa was on edge. He began scratching the back of his ear and rotating his neck as if he had a creak. He gave us last-minute instructions. "You kids sit there nicely, be little ladies like Mama says, and keep your mouths shut." I pressed my lips together and squared my shoulders. When Papa stopped the car, a cold-eyed, uniformed inspector put his face up close to the isinglass curtain and peered in. Papa told him about Mama's china and signed some papers. The inspector nodded. "If you've got nothing more to declare, we can let you go right through." Before Papa could turn the key, the inspector spotted us girls in the back. "Good morning, young ladies." We hadn't had much involvement with uniformed authorities, or any strangers for that matter. We viewed them with suspicion. In answer to the inspector's greeting, we did exactly as Papa had said and kept our mouths shut. The inspector's voice became friendly. "Have you had a nice visit in Canada?" No one answered. I suppose the inspector thought we were all hard of hearing, because he raised his voice and repeated, "Have you had a nice visit in Canada?" We remained silent. The inspector addressed us as if we were responsible adults. "Are you young ladies bringing back anything?" At that moment, I was enveloped with a strange sensation. I could feel the vibrations beginning in Dorothy's vocal cords, and I could feel her taking in a breath, preparing to speak. In a flash, I realized that if a fiasco was to be averted, I needed to take immediate action. I clamped my hand over Dorothy's mouth and muttered, "Papa said to keep your mouth shut." The inspector raised his eyebrows. "Aha!" He instructed Papa to pull our car out of line, and while other cars breezed merrily through, the inspector burrowed into every nook and cranny. Mama took it better than Papa, although every time a bag was jiggled or a suitcase opened, she came close to a dead faint. She said later she wished she had known where the liquor was, so she could have concentrated her fainting spells. Papa kept scratching his ear and talking about the weather and the American flag and other pleasantries. I had never seen him so accommodating. On the other hand, his one squirting eye conveyed the message that he wasn't exactly pleased with me. I kept thinking about adoption. Finally, we were released. When we were on the road again, Mama was the first to find her voice. "I thought you said they weren't after the little guy." Papa had finally settled comfortable behind the wheel, but he still wasn't up to conversation. Mama continued, "Well, now that you've scared all of us to death, you can tell us where you hid the liquor." Papa's voice was coming back. "Well, since you were so uppity, I guess I won't tell you." With that, Papa began singing. "My wife and I live all alone, in a little log hut we call our own. She loves gin and I love rum. I'll tell you we have lots of fun. Ha, 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 you and me, little brown jug. Don't I love thee? Ha, 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 you and me, little brown jug. Don't I love thee?" No one relaxed completely until we were home and the car was unloaded. Mama went to take a hot bath. Flora phoned her friends and Dora and I went to play with our dolls. Papa was busy somewhere. Suddenly we heard him yell. We all ran. He was standing at the basement sink with the canvas bags in his hands. "This stuff is nothing but water." Mama arrived in her robe with her head wrapped in a towel. You mean, that's where you hid your liquor? In the water bags?" "I thought it was water. I poured it in the radiator." Papa was aghast. "You poured my high-priced scotch down the radiator?" It was a long time before Papa could see the humor in the story, but by Christmas I heard him joking with Mac. "I hope you didn't cancel your account with our friendly bootlegger." Throughout the ensuing years, I suffered many lectures on the meaning of keep your mouth shut, never suspecting that all the while my First Amendment rights were being violated.